Hello everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips. And a couple things before I get started with the two things that I want to talk about today. The first thing is we are posting videos on other platforms. So if you are subscribed to BitChute, BitChute, or Parler, Parler, we are posting our videos there too for reasons that I think everybody understands, and we'll continue to do that. So all of the videos, I think for the last month or so, are on these two platforms, and every week we're posting, and we'll get caught up with all the past ones sooner or later. The COVID ones, I mean, there's like 2,000 on YouTube, so we probably won't post them all there, but maybe eventually. The second thing is, if you saw the America's Frontline Doctors, one of them was a colleague of ours who's been associated with Wellness Forum for years. His name is David Calderwood, and he's from Alabama. And I just want to, congratulate David and express gratitude for his bravery in going to Washington, D.C. with those doctors and speaking out and that sort of thing. I sent David an email. I'm just proud to be his friend and proud to be his colleague. And gosh, if we had more doctors like David Calderwood in the country, we really wouldn't have a medical crisis right now, would we? So thank you, David, on behalf of all of us and all of the tens of thousands of people who see this video, these videos every week. Yesterday's newsletter, the title is Why COVID-19 Clinical Trials Cannot Be Trusted. The gold standard for science is gold for the drug companies, by Peter Bregan and Ginger Bregan. Once again, if you are a subscriber to the newsletter, you're getting these already. If you become a subscriber, we will send you some back issues, articles. pampopper@msn.com is the email address to use. And then those of you who continue to ask about the CDC study showing that masks don't work, you can go to our website at WellnessForumHealth.com to find that. That was from a previous video clip. So that's probably enough announcements for now. I'll scatter some things throughout the rest of the week too. But a person wrote to me, and I don't usually do a lot of answering people's questions, but I thought that this was something that really needed to be addressed. So this woman writes, and she says, I've got a few questions in regards to your most recent video. Some states are now a police state, camps and ankle bracelets. You stated that a Massachusetts legislator was trying to pass a law requiring people to wear face masks. Wouldn't you rather read the entire bill that was proposed instead of trying to put fear in the eyes of your viewers? The bill states that the mask would be required when you cannot maintain 6 feet apart during the pandemic, as well as out-of-state visitors quarantining for 2 weeks if coming from a hotspot. The bill states when and where to remove the face masks, and it really is not that crazy at all. As for fines, that is how laws work. Okay, so this is the first point. Obviously, it's only requiring people to wear masks when they can't stay 6 feet apart. That's okay, the state requiring you to do it. Quarantining, okay, and fines, okay. I don't even know where to start with a person who thinks that this type of legislation that takes people's rights away is okay, but it gets better. As for the Linscotts, I agree that ankle bracelets are extreme. However, why not comply with the request to quarantine for 2 weeks and sign the papers? That would have saved them the ankle bracelets, their peace of mind, and their freedom. No, you see, my dear, quarantining for 2 weeks when there's nothing wrong with you. You used a fake test to get a positive result when the person is asymptomatic. That's not logical at all. That is taking freedom away. You do not maintain your freedom when you sign a consent to stay in your house for 2 weeks because somebody used a fake test and diagnosed you as being positive. As for McDonald's, you left out the part that it was from New Brunswick, the Canadian province. Well, I'll tell you what, as long as contact tracing through restaurants is being done in Canada and not the United States, it's okay, right? It's not okay anywhere that the condition of ordering food is you have to give your name and contact information in case somebody who's in the McDonald's at the same time as you tests positive using the fake test. I don't care what location on the planet, this is not okay. Arkansas, where'd you get that information? As I do my research, it very clearly states that 14 members of the National Guard will be providing support to sick COVID-19 patients in Little Rock. They'll be providing transportation to those who are not able to properly quarantine, as in homeless people and others that need the help and don't have the space to quarantine. Yes, the patients who recover are released. So as long as the National Guard picks up somebody and takes them to the isolation center and releases them, it's okay. In Ventura County, the quarantine has been lifted. Okay, so as you can lock everybody in and not let them leave and disable their keys as long as you unlock them later, okay? I mean, this is unbelievable. I hope you start to speak the whole truth and not just bits and pieces of things. I don't know what bits and pieces of this are difficult to understand. It would be great to get a response from you answering the questions. I'm giving you a response. This is ridiculous. It is scary. And if you look around the world at what's going on, it's going to get worse. It is getting worse in some places, okay? So obviously we have a lot of people in the United States of America that have not read our Constitution, do not understand their constitutional rights, and so they would probably not be distressed if the National Guard escorted them out of their home and took them away from their children to go to an isolation center. But you know, there are people in the United States who think that that's not a good idea. There are people in the United States that think that it is nobody's business at the McDonald's counter what your address and contact number is. Thankfully, I think there are more of us who do understand our rights, because that's how we're going to get our rights restored in the United States of America. All right, so let's talk about numbers. I love to talk about numbers. And by the way, some of you ask me to, why can't I package all this up and put it somewhere, and although we just love doing free stuff here and we try to do a lot of it, there's a limit to it. So we're just going to pay attention to the bigger issues here. I do memorialize things in a pretty well referenced way in the newsletters. So if you're a newsletter subscriber, you get a lot of referenced written stuff. The video clips, it's very difficult to take an hour and a half or more of content and create transcripts, and some of it's transient information. And that gets me in trouble, because somebody 6 months later, or 5 months later in this case, will say, well, I looked at this data point that you put out in March and it isn't true anymore. Yes, the death rate has increased since March. So sometimes the numbers are transient, which is why I don't go on ahead and post some of the stuff. But anyway, I want to talk about Sweden, and the reason I want to talk about Sweden is that there's a huge disconnect between what's really going on in Sweden and what the press is reporting. And if you're still a skeptic about all of this, I would really advise you to start looking into what the press says about what's happening in Sweden and what the Swedes say about what's happening in Sweden. And because I think that actually they may know a little bit more about it than CBS, I'm just saying, right? Okay, so that's what I want to talk about. So at a press conference very short time ago, just a few days ago, Swedish Health Minister Anders Tegnell said a massive decline in new COVID-19 cases shows that Sweden's approach to this whole thing might have been better than much of the rest of the world. In many ways, he says, the voluntary measures we put in place in Sweden have been just as effective as complete lockdowns in other countries. The infection rate has fallen sharply, the curves are going down, and the curves for the seriously ill are beginning to approach zero. Unlike most countries, Sweden didn't do the hard lockdowns. They effectively showed that Fauci and his criminal co-conspirators were completely wrong about a shutdown being necessary in order to save the people. So, instead what they did was they basically just encouraged individual responsibility. The restaurants, bars, public pools, libraries, most schools remained open. They did impose a little bit of capacity limit, but we'll take a look at some economic data in a minute, and you'll see that economically the country is doing very, very well, as opposed to our country is just disintegrating. While we're having this conversation through video clips, it's disintegrating. So what's really amazing, and we'll get to hard numbers in a minute, so you'll see what I'm talking about, but while the success should be celebrated, and we should be learning from it, and they should be letting our people go in this country, this is what the media has to say. Now, I'm telling you what the Swedish health minister has to say, okay? Here in the United States, we're all told to listen to Fauci, follow the science. Well, this is the Fauci of Sweden, so we'll listen to him. CBS News says Sweden becomes an example of how not to handle COVID-19. Well, that doesn't sound like what I just told you. The University of Virginia Health System used a news release titled "Lack of Lockdown Increased COVID-19 Deaths in Sweden." Actually, no, it didn't. Newsweek said Sweden COVID-19 deaths linked to failure to lock down as country prepares for second wave. Actually, they're not having a second wave. The New York Times ran a piece headline, "Sweden tries out a new status, pariah state." Well, that doesn't sound like what happened. Business Insider reported, Sweden's coronavirus death toll is now approaching 0, but experts are warning others not to hail it as a success. Now think about that. The death toll is 0, but we don't want to call that a success because that would be crazy talk in COVID land, right? Perhaps the best way, I think, to measure Sweden's success is let's take a look at what happened, all right? So you remember I've talked extensively about the model that was used in the beginning, Ferguson's model, where he predicted 2 million people would die worldwide. He was off by 96%. And our friend Fauci, Feckless Fauci in Washington, D.C., bought that hook, line, and sinker, never checking out that the guy's track record was 100% failure, being thousands of percent off in previous situations. So anyway, what did Ferguson say was going to happen in Sweden? The hospitals would run out of ICU beds before May, and almost 100,000 people would die by July. And it was frightening. And of course, that was the whole point. I mean, the guy was making stuff up. I mean, there's no other way to put it because he's done it in the past. He's a serial liar in terms of what he has done in the past. And you would think that somebody as smart as Fauci would have checked into it. I don't know, I'm just saying. We do crazy stuff like that around here where we check into people's backgrounds before we let them in. Crazy talk in COVID land. All right, so what actually happened? The total COVID-19 deaths in Sweden weren't 100,000. They were 5,700. 5,700, okay? Hospitals were never overrun. Daily deaths in Sweden are almost to 0, and the health agency reports at this point in time when I'm making this video, no new ICU admissions, okay? So they weren't wrong. The Ferguson model wasn't wrong as it pertains to Sweden, and it wasn't just wrong as it pertains to the United States. It was wildly, ridiculously wrong, and we still don't talk about that enough here in the United States. So the Swedish experience is important because they did not do this draconian nightmare crap that we're dealing with here in the United States, and they're doing just fine over there, all right? So Phil Magnus at the American Institute of Economic Research wrote a piece on this, and he said Sweden's success suggests the presumed risks and benefits of lockdowns were largely a fiction. The assumed benefits of a more severe lockdown policy appear to have been greatly exaggerated. The assumed risks of the milder course adopted by the Swedish government appear to have been similarly inflated, and the overall death toll of the baseline do-nothing scenario appears to have little grounding in reality. Some thought that caution was warranted given the unknown threat of COVID-19. I wasn't one of those people, but I was willing to concede that, okay, we take a 2-week pause and we see what happens and all that stuff we were told. It's that it is now August and we're still doing this that is absolutely insane. So, you know, and what this has cost us economically is just hard to imagine, and I'll give you some data on that too. So looking at the United States right now, let's look at what happened here. So Fauci and his colleagues and the establishment media and the government, actually we don't have elected officials anymore. We have an emperor here in Ohio who incidentally yesterday tested positive and then he tested negative, and it'll be interesting to see which of the 2 test results he would like to acknowledge is right. I mean, his own testing system shows that it's unreliable, so I don't know, if we're lucky he'll act on the positive part. Maybe we don't have to listen to his whiny rear end every day at 2 o'clock or twice a week at 2 o'clock while he tells us the latest things he's dreamed up in the basement of his beautiful multi-million-dollar farm. But anyway, I digress. So let's look at what happened. So around the United States, we've had all this draconian stuff going on, and lockdowns and quarantines and curfews. And gosh, the mayor of Los Angeles says he's going to disconnect the utilities, water and utilities for anybody who hosts a party. This is dangerous stuff. Well, I don't think that this is what we are expecting might happen. As of right now, the U.S. corona death rate is 3.35 new deaths per million per day. Which ranks as the 11th worst rating on the planet, okay? And then that includes Andrew Cuomo's nursing home death count model of virus containment, as the AIER puts it. New York State accounts for more than 1/5 of all COVID-19 deaths, according to Johns Hopkins data. And by the way, some of the New York lockdown rules were the most draconian of all. So if we were looking at lockdowns equals better results, there's no way to possibly explain what happened in New York based on that. So what else has happened? Well, we've lost 30 or 40 million jobs, okay? Some people will find work doing something else, but a lot of those jobs are not coming back. We destroyed everybody. We just ripped up the Constitution and said anytime somebody declares a pandemic, whether there is one or not, we just don't have any rights anymore, and we're going to take a long time to undo that through the court system. We turned Americans against each other, which is really right out of the Mein Kampf playbook. They must have been studying it for a while before they started all of this. Commerce Department numbers show that the U.S. economy shrank by 32.9% last quarter. Bloomberg called it the sharpest downturn since at least the 1940s. The Swedes, now let's take a look at what happened with them by comparison. Remember, they didn't lock down and they weren't using hand sanitizer and walking around with ankle monitors for people who disobeyed and face masks everywhere you go. Life went on there. As of Saturday, a week ago Saturday, Sweden had 0.65 deaths per million per day. Now, I'm going to remind you, 3.35 new deaths per million per day in the United States. In Sweden, 0.65. Part of that may be because Sweden is being much more genuine and honest about the deaths, as opposed to the United States, where we know that a lot of COVID deaths were really attributed to other causes. As of June 18th, we were looking at a 2.6% drop in Sweden's employment rate. In the employment rate. Unemployment in the United States shot up 11.2 percentage points from 3.5% in February. So throwing millions of people out of work, that's always a good plan. So the bottom line is that this country, the United States, has suffered economic losses and collateral damage. I think when it's all said and done, I believe the number was like 11 million people were slaughtered in the Holocaust. And we didn't really haul them to camps and slaughter them here, but what we are doing is slaughtering them slowly as nursing home patients. I'll report some really things that are quite disturbing, I think, on Friday when I cover consequences. But people are dying alone in nursing homes without proper care. People have died from lack of medical attention. The suicides and the overdose deaths are up significantly more than we would expect by this time of the year. And Sweden didn't do any of this stuff, and their numbers are better than ours. And what is really, I think, the most frustrating for some of us who are looking at this every day is that evidence just doesn't matter. Science doesn't matter. For all the lecturing we get about stick with the science, listen to the science. You know, Mr. Fauci likes to do that, even though he doesn't listen to any science at all. He just makes stuff up. But for all that lecturing that we get, if we were going to look at the science, why don't we look at what happened in Sweden? And I think that we should also hold the media accountable. In fact, I'm getting an increasing number of emails from people suggesting that perhaps the media should be sued for their role in fanning the flames of fear in people that caused a lot of death and destruction as well. Well, we'll see about that. I've thought for a long time that the media needed some kind of consequence for their behavior. But in any case, the real story of Sweden is different than the one that the media tells you. And if you were going to do research on anything to start looking at, if you're still on the fence about this and you're still thinking that people like me maybe not telling the truth and the government is, dig into this and start looking into it. Start looking at your own state's numbers. You'll be shocked at what you find. And again, start checking things out. I'm still astounded at the number of people who want to disagree with me and say, oh, I don't have time to look into anything, but you're wrong. Okay, well, that's a level of stupidity I don't even know what to say about. All right, well, that's enough for today. As usual, you can pass this on to anybody who you think would benefit from watching it, and I will be back to you tomorrow with more news.